to a parenchymal bleed in traumatic brain injury is especially high when the injury occurs in the brainstem.
And a trellis of smooth, thick cabling across the floor, a confounding of muscled tentacles, and the thin, cheap speaker cabling dragged about by coelenterate and certain slow waveform eels, and the stiff, glowing pricks emerging from certain lophiformal foreheads, and the two straight lines of scientific investigation of photic empiricism, and then pasty gymnastic ribbons of jism. And all this fucking hair, and me playing the role of the decrepit spider who most certainly belongs on the landing and not in the bathtub, the terrible whim of your ghastly children. And this one goes out at a terrific velocity, flung by a comely, confident arm arcing across the summer sky to never, ever land, as if we can believe that sort of thing anymore. A stone skimming the surface, for a moment there joined by a flying fish, both of them, fish and stone, coins. This one goes out to the French Foreign Legion, trudging their own silica seabed to the beat of their uniform hearts. This one goes out to the desert, being a ship of the desert, if you like, all coarse hair and dry, mutable geologies, yellowing waves as half-turned pages, corners, perpetually folding like sugared egg whites in a glorious gesture of inchoate demarcation to summon such and such. A recipe, a quote, those parts that chime with your own inadmissible ideas, supporting scooped bucket seats in the dunes, a world whipped into representations of provisional shelters moulded by deft hands of wind and dismantled in an instant by the simple, devastating absence of a single moist brain to sustain them. This one goes out to the French Foreign Legion, over there and some ways off. This one goes out of the dock, slips out of those handcuffs, slips out of those wet things, please, slips into something more comfortable, do. Slips between the hands and the tongue, and the hot, tarred eyes turned, slips out of sight. This one goes out to the sand-blasted basement, pryly encrusted with the obscene graffiti of a listless troop of AWOL legionnaires, chronicling, after the fashion, their rise and fall from the sun's favour. This one, here, 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 is not a holiday destination, just to be clear. This one goes out to the teetering heaps of countless vitamins walking upright along the beach toward the harbour, gingerly avoiding rock pools and the inbound tide, in flagrant excess of your RDA. I don't want to hear any news on the radio about the weather on the weekend. Talk about that. Once upon a time, a couple of people were alive who were friends of mine. The weathers they lived in, Christ the sun on those Saturdays.
And now a second figure emerges from out of the darkness, and we are two. I'm Stephen Bode, I'm director of film and video umbrella. My role for the next 20 minutes is to be its material interlocutor for the rest of the evening, and maybe a bad cop to his good cop, or good cop to his bad cop, I don't know, but anyway. So, let's wind back to the beginning a little bit, or at least to the last two pieces we saw, and the making of those two pieces, which are the pilot for, and then the second chapter of your two-part commission for our project Tomorrow Never Knows, which, as Stephen said, is in its final weeks at Jerwood Space. And just a bit of background on that project, we, i.e. that is Film Video Umbrella and Jerwood, we're keen to take this title, Tomorrow Never Knows, this theme, Tomorrow Never Knows, and apply it to trying to identify a group of younger artists which we felt were deserving of the label and hopefully not the burden of being kind of talents and prospects for the future. And we through a process of nominations and a selection panel, alighted on the names of Ed Atkins, Nahid Rasa, who is talking here at the ICA next week, and also Corinne Swan and Emma Hart. And we were confident that these were names to watch, and I think in this case that's been an assumption that's been entirely and wonderfully justified. But we also wanted to kind of create a context through this project and the commissions that the artists had to speculate, for them to speculate about ideas and images of the future and how the future might be seen from the vantage point of the present, but also how we might look back on futures past and futures lost. And I think Ed is, in particular, is a really sort of resonant example in that respect. His work, as you can see, obviously is extremely contemporary and forward-facing in its embrace of and use of technology, but it's also, I think, often invested with a streak of melancholy in terms of some of those big time-honoured themes about mortality, about the passing of time, the ravages of time, the limits and limitations of the body. And in preparation for me talking with Ed tonight, I went back to some of our early exchanges on the piece that would become Liquid Cop, and looking at our emails then, I was struck and amused by the fact that one immediate shared point of reference, which may not come across too much now, was Dennis Potter actually. And the idea in the Liquid Cop of the sort of detective trapped in his own sort of incriminating bubble of his imagination, which I thought was really strong. But also the two pieces that Potter made, the two films, TV films that he made at the very end of his life in the shadow of terminal cancer, which were Karaoke and Cold Lazarus, and their preoccupation with that kind of techno-utopian dream of the 90s at the time about virtual reality. And it got me thinking about a quote. There's a nice line from the futurist Bruce Sterling, the science fiction author Bruce Sterling, which describes nicely the preoccupations and fantasies of that time about virtual reality, which he characterizes in the line of getting away from the meat, he calls it. And it strikes me that one of the things, I think he meant that line actually quite ironically, in the same way sort of someone like David Cronenberg probably means or proclaims long live the new flesh, as he does in Videodrome. But it strikes me that what you're doing in your work, despite its computer-generated figures and its sort of apparitions of things coming from haunting the near future, is exactly the opposite of that. It's more about illuminating the meat, magnifying it, even tenderizing it a bit. And I think there's something really virtual going on in your work, that's something equally extraordinarily and contrastingly visceral. So maybe if you want to talk a little bit about that binary, if indeed it is a binary for you.
Yes. So rather than getting away from meat, yeah, okay. I suppose one of the things that seems that always seemed kind of very important about using digital and particularly computer-generated bits to make a moving image was to think about materiality in this as a sort of time-honoured element of kind of moving image discourse, and then sort of seeing what has happened to some of those areas of discourse and maybe some of the politics that are innate to those in a digital terrain. And one of the things that seemed kind of apparent and is, I guess, most apparent in cinema is this sort of sense that a lot of the technology is really privileging skin and both the representation of that, but also kind of a mode of address that addresses the body as much as maybe the eyes and the ears, that actually is kind of about an immersive thing. So surround sound and things is kind of has a kind of full corporal address. But at the same time, there's a sense that the medium itself is has gone through a kind of process of losing its, at least its kind of overt indexical material form. So rather than film or DVDs or whatever, you have these things. And one of the, I guess one question was trying to work out, there's this Andre Bazin quote where he's talking about the matter never goes away, and he's totally right, scientifically I'm sure, but also interesting to ask the question where the body of the medium is then, or where is it finding its material, where is it manifest? And one of the answers to that would be the bodies of the viewers, I suppose, that it would become. So, explicitly I made a piece which kind of suggests that might manifest as a tumour. The thing would appear as a tumour in the body of the viewer. But yeah, so I wanted to maintain this character. I don't suppose I wanted to kind of resolve this in some way by saying I want to return to the body, because I don't think it's not as simple as a sort of leaving and then coming back, which, I suppose there's a kind of standard idea which might be that, we're spending too much time in a virtual sort of digital terrain and not enough time physically alongside our fellow people, but I don't want to be that didactic really, sort of talk in those sorts of ways, but more of this interesting point where these things can oscillate or be together, and actually that you can be perpetually kind of spun back and forth rather than a kind of movement in one direction, I suppose. So the work maybe would pull you in, and you would, and pulling in might be an act of leaving the body to a certain extent, and then you'll return to it, and then you pull back, and you cover vast distances. Maybe you go to a planet somewhere at the bottom of the sea, or you're back to your seat, or you're back inside your mouth, or you're feeling aroused, or you're feeling desperate, or that actually, and the complications of so much. So emotion maybe also being a kind of something like a sort of catalyst between. Sorry, I'm just ranting.
I think you're very precise in the way that you like to, as I know, define your work, or the terminology of your work as being in high definition video, and it is a strange medium. It's very sharp on the eye and very fuzzy on the mind, because it exists really as no more than a series of ones and zeros in data space, and your work definitely seems to want to investigate the materiality of this so-called immaterial medium, and I think there's something very nice in the essay that Melissa Gronland wrote for Tomorrow Never Knows for the work that's on at the Jerwood at the moment, and speculating a bit about how every era might see its dominant medium of the moment as being immaterial, because it's still slightly out of focus, and how in the 50s and 60s Roland Barthes said he hated film because there was nothing to hold on to, there was nothing to grasp onto, or grasp hold of. And now, in contradistinction to the digital, it's almost impossible to think of film, celluloid film, as being immaterial in that way.
Yeah.
So everything kind of changes, and so we can talk about it speculatively, we can talk about it in the abstract. There's the thing I always remember about high definition and its relationship to the body and how it plays on the body is that thing that people say that high def is the makeup artist's nightmare, because it's the perfect image, the absolutely perfect image, which reveals the imperfections of the body so much more. So we may have ended up in a situation where we no longer see every individual pixel, but we now see in every individual blackhead, every zit, every blemish and every flaw. And I think there's something in your work which returns us through tumours and polyps and these kind of rogue elements like you know, eyelashes in intimate places, or rogue pubic hairs, or even the kind of swearing and lurching of you know, you seem to want to investigate not just the surface glitches of this, but maybe a sort of underlying pathology in our particular moment, where in this desire for the perfect image or for perfectibility, we're also revealing something about ourselves that we might not necessarily want to reveal.
I think that the problem of revealing too much, or revealing fault, is that it's the wrong fault. It's the kind of, you know, so digital is kind of, well, lots of digital media is kind of characterized by its attachment and conspicuous attachment to the kind of performance of analog, you know, aesthetics or kind of movements and things, you know, that you kind of want to know while watching a Pixar film that there's a lens there, so they splash some water on it, you know, that there's no camera. I mean, you know, this sort of concessionary thing that allows recourse to a coherence or an intelligibility, I think. And I think that as well as the kind of sense that probably any age in its time understands technology as essentially immaterial, that's kind of predicated on ignorance of the thing, you know. In the same way that I can say that these videos are immaterial, but it's just a deferral of material. I mean, really, it's, you know, it's like an iPad that minds in Africa are kind of creating this thing that is then magic and stuff, you know, that it's sort of, it seems to be based on ignorance. And you know, and part of the kind of, some of the writing around this stuff, for the latest one particularly, is kind of this thing of not knowing how to make a computer, or not knowing how to make a gun, or this kind of confession of ignorance in the face of these things that probably know, that profess maybe to know a lot about me in their kind of desires or something, or the desires of these things. What was your question? Sorry.
Let's move on to another.
Sorry.
I'll come to the...
Oh, the makeup thing.
Yeah.
No, faults. No, because I think because I really like that. I really like the sort of, you know, I mean, the last one's full of lens flare. It's just, you know, it's all fake, obviously, and you know, really ridiculous sort of pushing between very tight depths of field, all of which are kind of, I suppose, really I mean, they're overemphasizing the analog in these situations. In the same way that HD's failing, or like, you know, all that stuff about The Hobbit recently, that 48 frames a second is too real, and everyone's saying it's too real, and no one really knows what they're saying by saying that. I don't think, I mean, I wouldn't, you know, like, I don't know what I mean by that, but I mean that I don't want them that close, I don't want them dwarf in my face, you know, I don't want to see their mortality, or I don't want to see, you know, it's just a bloke, really. It's just some bloke with a plastic thing. And what you want is this kind of necessary, I don't know, it's the sort of errors that actually point to illusion. And it's a really, I think it's a really complicated kind of movement, but, you know.
We'll come to that in a minute, about the motion capture that I was fixing small notes a bit of that. It's a thought I had. Use my microphone here to rather than just talk to myself. It's a thought I had when watching the Olympics and the summer, actually, about how the title sequence for the Olympics on the BBC was entirely computer generated for the first time. You never saw it at all. That's remarkable. But there was this kind of army of running, jumping, computer generated figures, obviously generated by an army of, I think, Chinese animators, and it had this really kind of interesting look to it. And it struck me, I kind of had a thought, because normally in these big universalizing events, especially sporting ones, you kind of go through this pantheon of images from different eras, and you can almost date them, carbon date them perfectly. You know, that's the sort of texture of film from the 50s to the 60s and onwards, and it sort of got me thinking that maybe we've got to a point now with high def, leaving aside the 48 frames and the Hobbit and all the rest of it, that we're almost sort of flatlining in terms of the quality of the image, and it might be really difficult to start to distinguish a 2005 high def image from a 2010 one to 2000, you know, we might, and that the way of starting this process all again was to use animation in that way, which of course is not, and it kind of brings a historicising to it, because when you go to the next Olympic Games, those animated figures are going to look so different and so out of date that you'll be able to say, oh well, that's a 2012 vintage, in the same way as we can now look back at textures of film from the 60s or video from the 80s or 90s and just almost date it. And this brings me to the point I wanted to make about the motion capture of spring mouths, which is about, it seems to me, and I know this because we've talked about it, that you had a choice of actually maybe scaling up and working with motion capture, which was more realistic and more lifelike. And you made a decision partly to keep that means of production relatively homemade and DIY and close to you. But there's also a sort of uncanny there. I mean, Freud talks about the uncanny as being almost lifelike, and there's that double take. Whereas you're going for something, it seems to me, that there's a different, almost grotesqueness about it's not quite right and not quite real, and that's deliberate. And so talk me through that a bit more.
A lot of the time I didn't, just sort of to speak previous things, I didn't really ever want to have a protagonist or a character or a person. I didn't want to film anyone's face, because I was kind of particularly interested in holding on to this being held apart from any kind of diegesis of the thing. You know, that you wouldn't be sucked in, that you were kind of always repelled and buffeted. And I always sort of imagined that a face would kind of collapse all of that, and suddenly you'd be sort of lost in the notion of character of a person, you know. But I always wanted to have a performing thing in it, you know. And CG seemed like, I mean, it was a kind of perfect thing, because it just determined he isn't a person, it's not a face. It doesn't really have character insofar as, except whatever I choose for, you know, like it's kind of a homunculus that you can, and you don't have to feel dodgy about it ethically either. I think this is kind of like not wanting to kind of film someone or something, you know. But it took a while to work out this connect thing. I mean, I didn't do that, but you know, it took a while for people who. So the connect is this. It's like a motion capture game thing for the Xbox 360. It's like for controlling games where you just sort of banally throw a plate or something. You know, it's really simple kind of control. But Microsoft released all the code for it very quickly, which was kind of amazing. And various programmers and students and amateurs and things have kind of done loads of different weird things with it. A lot of it kind of doing interactive stuff. But I liked the idea of performance capture as a pair of words as well as a thing. And so I got Kinect, and these guys in Zurich had this beta bit of software called Face Shift, and it was amazing. And you would get an immediate feedback on a kind of wireframe thing of your performance, albeit shit, you know, albeit kind of missing the tongue and a bit, you know, I mean, but reassuringly shit, thank God it wasn't that good, you know. In the same way that we don't want our hobbits to be that good, I think. I didn't want this guy to be that good. So the piece that I made for the Chisenhale, Us Dead Talk Love, was entirely sort of home brewed. You know, it was using this kind of stock, free head model. Who knows who he was? I mean, I'd chosen him for his shaving rash, you know. But then the chance of working on this was that I've never worked with anyone ever on anything, except a long time ago collaborating with my partner, and subsequently, you know, developed a practice that is self-reliant. I mean, I just have a laptop and lots of bits of software and a word processor, and everything's convened in this one space and inside me. And I kind of had come to believe or imagine that the work, to extend it to another bunch of people, to allow other people access before it's done, would be to kind of compromise the intimacy that maybe could happen with just me doing all of the stuff. Also, I'd never spent a penny on making a piece of work, so it was this wonderful thing of like, there's a budget, but it's also, what do I do with money, you know? And so working with this guy, that in the end, in the end we worked out that, I don't know how much it was per second for Hollywood-style motion capturing, but it was a lot, you know, huge amounts, and it would have just, you know, we talked a bit about maybe making a sort of 30-second long video commission. You know. Anyway, ended up working with this amazing guy. I was more than happy to outsource the hair to this guy, because I had no idea how to do any of that. And we did it via email. I never met him until he came to the opening. He's a lovely guy. He's worked with Helen Martin, helping her do her CG stuff. He's an amazing guy. He did all this hair, and it was great. But I was very careful to not give him particularly that good a set of instructions, except for kind of a standard angle and a few kind of. I'd like it to go up at some point and do funny things, because I kind of wanted to find it again. You know, there's this sense that in getting things, you kind of want most of them to be stock. But you want to go. The excitement of getting it back. You know, I don't know what it's going to look like, and then you feel it, and then there he was, and then I'd put on some lighting states and whatever, do all the rest of the stuff, and you know. But it was a very sort of felt like an important thing somehow, working with one more person. But he didn't know what it was or anything until he saw it. But I do feel like it's become important for me to hold on to that model of trying to do as much, because I also like to learn how to do these things. So next time I could do the hair, you know, probably not, but you know, I'd try.
Well, apart from this minor piece of remote outsourcing, you do everything yourself, and that also includes the writing of texts, which both accompany and rehearse. And I'm intrigued by, I know some of this, but I want the audience to hear this, about how you work in relation to, does the writing come first? Are these kind of scenes and scenographies, or what relationship does writing, which you are supremely gifted at, have to the visual work, and what's the dynamic between the two?
It's the attempt, I think, is to try and do things simultaneously. In the same way, I was talking to Stephen about this earlier, but just this thought of not wanting to make a soundtrack, because that sort of says that the visuals are the thing, and then this comes to serve them, and then this serves this. But actually, the possibility, really, and again, maybe this is about working alone or not dividing labour in that way, is that things kind of can potentially happen at the same time. So you can be sort of fiddling with something while writing something, while editing something. You know, there's this kind of. Having said that, there's quite, oftentimes the writing comes out in a big thing. You know, I never really sort of go back and change anything. It's just in one go. But it'll usually be catalysed and then sort of shaped by music and by a single image. I mean, like the Chisenheld thing, which was based on this, which just begins with the one image of someone finding an eyelash under their foreskin. Is that was the kind of there you go, well that, and then you know what I mean, like, but it's this desire really to be able to read and write at the same time. It's like trying to get things back, trying to refine things and not know them too well. So like, and I'm kind of very, very uninterested in anything except for the new one. The new one I still don't really know very well, and I can feel like I've got a lot to sort of learn around it for me, which is totally selfish, but I mean that in a kind of, as a reader of one's own work, I suppose.
No, good. I don't want you to be alone, and I don't want to be alone with you here. So this might be the moment at which we start to introduce ourselves to more people and their questions for you. What do I do here, Stephen? Do I give you the mic and then?
Right up for your mic. Fine.
I was always really interested in the way that you kind of cut up sound and use like real sound. I actually thought about it a lot like Frank Ocean and like on like R&B mixtapes you get online. I wanted to know if you see some kind of relationship with trying to imply reality through sound in that. What you find interesting about that?
Totally. R&B is a good. I think I'd like to make a piece soon that, like, the production of R&B is a really, I think, kind of fascinating. But I guess a lot of the kind of the kind of off-screen sound stuff is sort of more from a kind of field recording sort of musical background in a way, you know, or like a kind of that sort of DIY stuff. There's a few people that became really important to me musically. But at the same time, there's kind of this, it's the digital space as well. The R&B thing is really interesting because the production of that, you have these really conspicuous kind of, you know, in a long R&B or hip-hop concept kind of album, you get these tracks that are just, you know, some banter and shit, and watching and playing PlayStation or something. And then it goes straight to this sort of razor-sharp production that is just terrifying. And the decompression that you go through in that kind of production is really fascinating. But I think in terms of also treating this kind of stuff quite musically, like there's as a kind of editing thing, there's definitely rhythms that you get into. And similarly with the writing, that you like repetitions and sort of reattempt this, but try it with a brass section coming in here or something, or the choir saying this at this point. And yeah, but it's totally.
So you mentioned anaerovism and the idea that matter never goes, that matter never changes. And I suppose that this was something I was thinking about in relation to Matthew Braza. And I just wondered what your experience was of your work in conversation next to hers, if you did think anything, because you are, you know, very different artists with very different sorts of practices, but there are inevitably some interesting kinds of parallels.
Yeah. I mean, I hugely admire her piece, you know. I suppose it's really interesting. I mean, I was trying to think about this the other day, kind of like, I mean, there are sort of conspicuous and potentially kind of boring equivalents between them. But I think there's something about, there's a kind of neuroses in both of them that maybe is more interesting. Like the characters in the real people, in her documentary, I feel a certain affinity with them and the version of me that is in all of my things, the sort of paranoid, slightly abusive. I mean, they're not abusive, they're lovely. But they're mad, you know, in a way. They're also, I'm going to get lost here, but I haven't fully explored it. I mean, I haven't really fully explored my own thing, let alone the kind of comparison. But the Cryonics thing is really is super interesting. I guess my interest would be hugely tarred with fiction all over it. You know, I find it quite hard to do anything sort of straight and just do the thing, except for maybe the attempt at kind of an emotional documentary or something. You know. But that everything else around that would be the kind of structures and tropes and things of literature or cinema, or these kind of pretty much fictional kind of places, I suppose.
It does bring us back to one of those things we mentioned about VR at the very beginning. Sorry, I should take this now.
Well, we mentioned about VR at the very beginning, about this, you know, this illusion of living forever by downloading your brain to a computer generated, you know, some kind of data space. Whereas the freezing of the body in cryonics, which now seems a slightly archaic and retro sort of future, I was just, reminded of that Cold Lazarus thing,
Yeah.
Potter, and the whole idea of
Yeah.
immortality as the perfect data capture, if you like, and whether there's something at the end of this particular rainbow, not yours, personal one, but the technologies, which is asking a similar question.
Yeah, I don't believe in any of the sort of immortal things about technology or the cloud or any of the sort of allusions to really to immaterial, to the possibility of the immaterial. Really, it's a great fantasy and it's totally rich. But I don't want to live. I don't want to live forever. I certainly don't want the work to either. And I think that maybe there's a kind of interest there, or a complete disinterest in the maintenance of the future of the work. It's very much a kind of wanting to apprehend something now and feel it now, and sort of be with it in the moment and in the here. This pickling in the here thing, which seems like that's hopefully that's kind of what the work does. Hopefully, is to sort of really to delineate a present or something.
Just to say that I don't believe in the fantasy either, but I do think that when you see these things, you have to investigate the symptom, like what does it stand for?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
question number 3. Good. There's always question number 3 after that elusive question number 2.
Hello. I interpreted your issue with the realism of HD as that which leaves little to the imagination. Can I think this?
Yeah, I think another conversation would be about problems of representation, what might be at the sort of heart of this technological the move towards an ever sort of increasing cogency of representational accuracy or something, and necessarily probably always trying to make work that is dealing with those things that are always going to be opposed to representation or to finitude and kind of precision, so that HD in its kind of emphatic display of skin and failing skin and bodies and things is that it's sort of so conspicuously failing to properly describe the kind of more imagined scenarios of emotional effect and kind of love, or what it really is to apprehend things in the world. So yeah, it's definitely a failure of imagination. Yeah, I guess so. Insofar as the technology can't do that, but yeah.
I'm really interested also in your use of emotion, because emotion is not a very fashionable thing, can I say this? Or it's kind of, people feel uncomfortable around people being slutty with their emotions.
Yeah.
And your work's really interesting about that. Do you want to tell me more?
Yeah, well, I guess I'm totally uncomfortable around this stuff as well, but I think that like a lot of the things that are used are quite generic, and I think that this kind of recourse to the generic as the kind of the easiest way to speak about love is to play a love song, right? So there's a kind of this sort of anxious surrogacy. I can't actually enact this love or this closeness or sex or any of the kind of experiences, but not really wanting. But I suppose I don't want the work to be a consolation for that failure. I don't want it to sort of say, this is better than sex or something, or this is better than love or death or anything. But to kind of to speak of that area that's not. So there's bits of super sentimental kind of music. There's a bit of Aladdin in there. And in a previous piece there was this number from Sweeney Todd called Joanna that's really. It's like that I couldn't think of a more archetypal, sentimental bit of sort of wonder, but just because it's sort of totally legible as sentimental, somehow, and miraculously it still makes me cry, that in spite of apprehending its structure and really knowing how manipulative this fuck has been, I'm still falling prey to it and really loving it. And I think that's amazing. And this doesn't link up necessarily, but I think I really have faith in artifice to speak of these things, to not be them and not pretend and not lose you to the pretense of them, but to really to engender them in you, or to, you know what I mean? Yeah.
Hey, sorry, maybe this was already covered, but this kind of ties in as well. And then using these kind of older models, like facial capture or motion capture, you trying to, or are you interested in writing the kind of point on the uncanny valley, just kind of creating a sense of maybe like alienation, instead of an empathetic relationship with the viewer, but creating a slight, like this disturbing, CG that's a little bit, I don't know, like fucked up. Something isn't working where it's a little bit disturbing, but it's just maybe close enough to still maybe create some level of like affect, but
I suppose I don't want those things to be the thing that would engender the effective response, but precisely the kind of shitty bit of the kind of collapse of them, or the fact that or the closeness of just doing it yourself to them, or being that thing, or so rehearsing that poem over and over again, in the hair sort of being a bit of shit, the kind of the neediness of this thing, that it's the neediness of the thing, that it's precisely all of the things that it's supposed to be. So CG, which is kind of supposed to be demonstrably accurate and sort of, and the best CG you never notice, that kind of thing. Like, it's this effects are not meant to be seen, but when you do see them, they engender a different kind of empathy, and one that's potentially far more interesting than the kind where you're lost to it, or whether you're being, do you know what I mean? Like, so it's, that actually there isn't a sort of, hopefully there isn't, in spite of the kind of pretty misanthropic tone of a lot of it, that hopefully there isn't a demand of kind of to go along with this. And here's how you should feel, but here's how you might be feeling, and something a bit more. Yeah.
No, I think that's a good point to end on. I mean, we're not, despite the perfectibility of the technology, we're not perfect, and we're human, and that's what, it sounds sentimental, but that's what makes us the people that we are. So, I can't believe I just said that. Maybe I should stop while having the message ahead. I think it's been as close to a perfect evening as it possibly could have been. So thank you for everyone who's made it possible. Ed, Stephen, the staff at the ICA, and of course you, the audience. So thank you all very much. Thank you.